Very warm welcome to all participants of today's IS speaker event. I'm happy to see that so many of you have joined today's session. My name is Matthias and I will be today's host. Having said that, I'm very much delighted to welcome our two guest speakers today, Clas Neumann, live from Shanghai, and Dr. Manuel Vermeer, live from Heidelberg. Thanks for taking the time. Before I properly introduce our guests, let me briefly say a few words about the Asian European Society Munich. We are a non-profit Munich-based student society that aims to foster the mutual understanding between students from Asia and Europe. And therefore, our team of roughly 30 people organizes a broad range of events such as today's one. So to all the Munich students who are currently listening, I very much encourage you to reach out to us in case you want to be part of this community. That being said, for those of you who do not know our guests yet, I will say a few sentences about them. Let me start with Dr. Manuel Vermeer. Manuel is a leading Asia expert and consults companies and individuals on strategic and recruiting topics in China and Asia for more than already 25 years. Further, he's a frequent keynote speaker and co-founder of the East Asia Institute in Ludwigshafen. And also he taught at various universities around the globe, including universities in China and India. The half Indian, half German book author is fully proficient in Mandarin Chinese and acted in the mid-80s as an interpreter under former Chancellor Helmut Kohl. Coming to our second guest, based in Shanghai, Clas Neumann is the head of the global SAP Labs network that comprises more than 20 R&D centers across 17 countries worldwide. Having spent more than 15 years in both India and China, Clas is also part of the SAP's senior executive team and head of the fast growth market strategy group at SAP. Besides his role at SAP, Clas is also board member of the German Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai and former president of the Indo-German Chamber of Commerce. Lastly, Clas also authored multiple books on business practices in emerging markets, and also one of which co-authored with Dr. Manuel Vermeer. Before I hand over to them, let me finally elaborate on the structure of today's session. So Clas and Manuel will have a conversation about today's topic for roughly 35 to 40 minutes. And throughout the conversation, all of you are highly encouraged to ask questions or to submit questions via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And in the end, in the last 15 to 20 minutes in the open Q&A, we will try to cover as many as possible from them. Again, Clas and Manuel, thanks for being our guest today. We really appreciate it, and we are excited to hear your conversation. Thanks.
Okay, thanks for inviting us, and I'm happy to be here together with my old friend Clas. I think we've known each other for 20-something years already. I don't think we can speak about India and China's future without having talked about its past. So maybe let's have a look at our own past regarding Asia. I've been to China for the last 40 years, more or less, on and off. I went to China first time in 1982. We studied in Heidelberg, and then we took the train from Heidelberg to China. So Trans-Siberian Railway, 2 weeks going there. My first trip to India was when I was 1 year old, going by ship from Geneva through the Suez Canal to Bombay, where my mother is from. So while my recollection of this trip is a bit blurred, I do remember going to Shanghai in the 80s. Shanghai, as you can imagine, completely different city compared to now. We were like 20 or 30 foreigners in the whole city. So when we went to the zoo to take photos of the panda bears, the Chinese took photos of us because we were the most exotic animals in town, I guess. So were just completely different times. We were not allowed to have private connections to our Chinese fellow students. We're not allowed to have relatives, girlfriends, whatever. Only under great danger, which made it more interesting, perhaps even. China was just recovering from the Cultural Revolution, which officially stopped when Mao died in 1976. So it was like, you can imagine it, you can see it in movies more or less now. Everything was green and blue and gray and bicycles and no cars and so on. Just had started with the so-called reform policy of opening up China. So it was called 改革开放政策. So China was trying to see what happened in other countries and to adopt a certain kind of market economy. Deng Xiaoping was the guy in charge, and he said China should open up to the world, but very slowly. So how he put it was like crossing the river by feeling the stones. So so it was not like we take everything from abroad and we apply it, but let's keep our head down, low profile, learn from abroad, and then more or less we can develop our country. In the 90s, China opened up even further, even after Tiananmen, 1989, the massacre on Tiananmen Square in Beijing, where many students were killed, which didn't actually harm China. Tourists came, business people came before and after, more or less alike. The West was still hoping for China to turn into a democracy. Same with market economy, it also should turn into a democracy, which of course didn't happen. And then in 2012 and 2013, Xi Jinping came to power. Xi Jinping. The Economist calls him the most powerful man in the world. Definitely he's the most powerful man in China. He completely changed China's picture. Yes, he opened up even more regarding market economy. He installed an anti-corruption campaign. So in these terms, yes, same development. But on the other hand, we definitely see less freedom of speech, freedom for the press, individual freedom. All this has been cut down. So he had the example of Russia. He saw the mistakes the Russian Communist Party had made by opening up and then crashing down. So he said, this is not what we want to have in China. So either we go on this normal path as Deng Xiaoping had started it, and then maybe we'll have the same fate as the Russians, or we do something else. And so he concentrated the power of the Chinese Communist Party. He went against corruption, as we said. He strengthened the party control. So nowadays, party again is like God, you can't see it, but it's everywhere. And so China is more centralized than ever. Everything is like a pyramid going to Mr. Xi himself. So we don't have this personal kind of freedom we used to have. But China is therefore stronger. And there's no chaos. What happened in Russia was chaos and Luan, as the Chinese put it. I think Luan is something which every Chinese fears. So many people are quite happy to have a stable country with a guy at the top who, who has a strategy, who knows where he wants to go, which other countries actually don't have. And he definitely has the agenda of being against everything what happened in Russia. And this is always what is looming on the horizon. We don't want to be a second Russia. At the moment, you can say America first, but Xi Jinping turned it just definitely to China first. So he abandoned Deng Xiaoping's strategy of, as I said, crossing the river by feeling the stones step by step. And he says, no, China first. We want to be country number one. We want to be number one in 2049, which would be 100 years after 1949, when China was founded by Mao Zedong. Mr. Xi even wants to plant the red flag on the red planet on Mars in 2049. So he definitely has some agenda and some plans. And it's not like, America is number one, and now China also wants to be number one for the first time in history. Actually, it's the opposite. China and India always were the most important countries if we look at world history. So if we take the way we are counting in Europe, starting with the year 0 to the, say, 16th century, so for the first 1,500 years, maybe, India and China contributed about 70% of worldwide GDP to world economy. So for more than 1,500 years, was India and China actually were the world powers. And then China turned down, then Europe came, inventing steam engine, and electricity came and everything. So now Europe, if you see it as a whole, which is difficult enough, has maybe 200 or 300 years of history, economic history, and having a power. And the US maybe for 50 to 70 years, so after Second World War. So China, India always were the world powers. We had 300 years in Europe, we have 50 years or 70 maybe in the US, and now it's again China. So our vision of China wants to somehow overtake us for the first time is completely wrong. They made a lot of inventions, they were the world power, and now they want to be there again. I think this is something we have to keep in mind. So we have to see the development over the last years to be able to talk about future development. So I think this is what we can do now. Where will lead this? Where will lead is the world, and perhaps you, Clas, can go on and take it from here. Has India had a similar development? Was it completely different? And maybe is it comparable at all?
Yeah, thank you, Manuel. I believe indeed India also has had comparable times, right? Maybe not exactly at the same time, but if you look at it, India was also created, modern India, in the same century like today's China, right? The India independence and then also separation from what is today Pakistan was in 1947. And it had decades of what was then always called by the politicians the Hindu growth rate or Hindu rate of growth, which was somewhere between 3 and 5% over all these years. So India clearly fell back compared to all other Asian countries at that time. So, and actually, and you mentioned it, I think from its east by place hundreds of years ago as one of the really economic superpowers, to somewhere nowhere during those years. And I think a defining moment was then, I mean, after Indira Gandhi was assassinated and also Rajiv Gandhi, then in 1991 under Narasimha Rao, the real reforms were pushed off. And we saw from then onwards stronger growth rates also in India. And we also observed from then onwards, certainly in India, a new way how the economy was supposed to run. Much more freedom, right? The liberalization of the economy. Before it was all state-owned, controlled, nationalized, everything the government wanted to be part of. And that step by step was then released. But this process actually still continues. So it's not like that all sectors in India would be completely free and liberalized. There's still insurance, banking, there's still sectors where it's pretty tough for foreign investors, for example, to put their foot into. If we think about, interestingly, also from an economic point of view, India and China were about the same in 1990, and if we see where it's today, and I think we may talk about this a little later, then China has certainly developed much quicker. What we also saw in India now over the last, since Narendra Modi came into power, he's now in his second term, is a further push for economic and political reforms. And when I lived in India between the year, what was it actually, 2000 and 2012, so for about 12 years, I've been living in India there, and I, during those years, many of those reforms, they just didn't move. When I came there, people were already telling me, next year we will have a VAT tax reform here, right? And then things will be simplified. But it really never happened. It took a government like Modi, who had, because the BJP had so many votes, who could basically rule also better than his predecessor, who was Manmohan Singh, to really make a few of these essential reforms happening, and to make just business much easier. We at SAP, we have a good judgment of how complicated is a governance system and a tax system and so on in the country, because we have to localize our software for each and every country, because our customers run our software in 100 different countries. So usually for a normal country, I would say we have 5 to 6 developers who do that job, maybe 10, China maybe 20, India 150, right? So it gives you an idea how complex these systems are, and also how diverse that country is still in terms of states and laws, and also state law and so on. I mean, India, maybe different from China, is not a centralized state. It is also a very diverse state, and the states themselves have also a lot of power to implement their own laws and so on. Yeah, I would leave it at this. I don't know, Manuel, What about probably the innovation part of it? I mean, what's happening in China on that side?
Yeah, that's interesting because I think the way of innovation is different in India and China. I mean, education in China always meant learning by heart, copying. In the former system for the last 2000 years, more or less, this official system in China started in the 7th century, went until the 19th century. So for 1200 years, we have more or less this koju, this way of learning by heart and repeating. So students had to learn more than 400,000 characters by heart, taken from 4 books of Confucius and 5 other books, learn them by heart, answer questions, which basically was actually quite democratic because every peasant, every boy could participate in these kind of exams and, in theory at least, acquire quite a nice job somewhere high in the bureaucracy. So nowadays we still have this image of China, people are only copying and not thinking and doing what they're being told, and of course all this is nonsense. So China, of course, completely changed today. I think it's number 5 or something in worldwide application for patents. So it's very high up, and our cliche, of course, is completely wrong. But the flexible way of innovation, which maybe you might talk about in India, this is something we don't have in China. I think in this regard, China could be said it's more German. So a thorough way of planning and trying to implement new ways. And it's definitely not the bottom of the pyramid, which is happening in India, I guess, but in China, it's always the elite. So the best people are being chosen, the best people are being put in the universities, and then they get their own field where they can innovate, but it's always state-driven innovation. It's state-driven education even. So centralized, planned, and state-driven. But in the end, it's very successful. So even now, if you talk about Corona, I mean, the countries which are very successful in fighting the virus, for example, South Korea and Taiwan, so places where also we have a very huge and historical based influence of Confucianism, so Chinese way of thinking maybe. So maybe the Chinese way is more successful because, I mean, China has infrastructure and roads and electricity and food, India doesn't. China can feed its people, India doesn't. Different example, maybe even Silk Road. Let's take the new Silk Road initiative. Xi Jinping, president of China, head of Communist Party, pronounced this initiative in 2013, I think. So it was planned as being something to invest money to combine Asia and Europe. So the whole Eurasian continent from Shanghai to, I don't know, Duisburg or something should be somehow tackled. Nowadays it's going to Africa, it's extending to South America, of course to Southeast Asia. And one of the big players in the world which are not participating is India. Because I think India sees China as I would not say enemy, but at least as a competitor, let's put it a bit more diplomatic, in the South China Sea and also in the Indian Ocean, which is a very, very important place. And from the Chinese point of view, they have to see how can they take care of the reserves, oil reserves, for example. So China is building ports, say in Pakistan, so the oil can be taken through Pakistan, from the Arabian Sea to Pakistan, directly to China, because there's a small part of Kashmir, which the Indians say is India, but China says is China, and it's called Aksai Chin. So through this small part in Kashmir, we can have the oil from Pakistan directly to China. So we can avoid the bottleneck of the Strait of Malacca in Singapore, which of course is very dangerous. Also, the Chinese build ports in Myanmar, and I've seen them myself. So they also try to avoid Malacca, the Straits of Malacca, to all these things. So if we have a look from the geopolitics, from this point of view, I think the Belt and Road Initiative is very important, but it's not only Asia and Europe, because it's now the whole world. And of course, it's very interesting how India wants to tackle this topic, because Pakistan and African countries, of course, they don't have the money to pay for all this infrastructure China is building. So they have this debt trap where they have to take a loan from China, which they can't repay, and then they have a problem. So I think you have been to Sri Lanka, to Hambantota, and seen that. I'm not quite sure because the Chinese also bought more or less, or I mean, officially they leased it. You can just say also bought the harbor of Hambantota in Sri Lanka, which is very important from a military point of view. Have you been there?
Yeah, I've been there. I think actually it's not too long ago. Last year we were in Sri Lanka, and indeed there's a bit of a split there in terms of the assessment of investment from China, because I mean we went with some whatever car which we rented, a driver there, and said, okay, what about here the investment? He said, oh yeah, it was a wonderful, great road. The Chinese built this here. I'm so happy. Before it took 10 hours to go to Gaul to the south. Now it's just 1.5 hours. So that's a real improvement, and we never got it fixed. Now they got it done. Yeah. On the other hand side, you mentioned Hambantota is a big harbor, which also was built with Chinese investment. And then, of course, comes the moment of truth. Sometimes when they say, okay, it was a loan, please repay. Yeah, the repayment starts tomorrow. And then some governments say, oh, repayment? Sorry, yeah, then you can also lease it to us back 99 years, right? I think 99 years is a concept the Chinese also learned on the hardware, I would say, because they had to lease Hong Kong for 99 years to the British, right? But then also kept that contract and waited 99 years to get it handed back in 1997. I wanted to come back to the topic of innovation. I mean, certainly, on some extent, you're right. I mean, what I see in China, the state-driven and also financed innovation certainly has also significant results. I mean, if I go on a high-speed train from A to B here, it's never delayed. It's always on time. It's very reliable. I always say, yeah, it's when I go from Hamburg to Munich, I always have a delay. But if I go to Beijing to Shanghai, it will be always on time. Yeah, so and even pretty quick. So there are many areas of innovation. India, by the way, also has state-owned innovation. If you think about the moon program, sending an orbiter around the Mars. So here, both countries are also clearly competing, and I would also say nearly head-to-head in what their space programs, nuclear programs, and other of these very big state-driven programs. But what is probably different in India is innovation genuine by the people. Yeah, and I always think, having lived in India, it's also not a surprise, because the daily struggle to some extent, even to get to work, right? So because of the traffic jam, we had nearly every other day a power cut at home. So you have to mobilize ideas and resources to deal with the daily situation. That makes you innovative. Yeah, and this concept like Jugaad innovation, they sprang off from India, because this means in the end nothing else than innovate out of what you have and create new things, maybe based on constraints. But that's whereas Jugaad maybe is more innovation often referred to in daily life. What we also have seen in India is very successful innovation on an industrial application. Take very, I think, well-known example is this thing of reverse innovation. Yeah, where GE they got this task in their development centers in Munich and also in the US to develop a new scanner for low-cost countries, so to say, instead of $30,000, maybe for below $1,000, right? And then the ultra-scan device for the body, yeah, and as a medical device, and the development centers in the developed markets said this can't be done. It's just impossible. Already the plotter to plot the graph will be more expensive. Yeah, and then they gave the same task to the development center in India, right? And they took all kind of different pieces. The plotter came then from a cashier from the supermarket and this and that, and they put it together and put it into a machine for $200-300. And this machine can do 90% of what the $20,000 machine can do. But it's good enough for also 90% of the usage of that very big machine. Yeah, so here you see there can also sometimes very good innovation can happen from such a system. I always said when I gave an idea or in India to our development community, I would not have even finished my sentence. 10 colleagues would jump up and say, I know how to do this. Let me immediately start on this, right? And when I would come with the same idea to my German developers, I would hear 10 good comments why this can never be done, or concerns at least. Now, both ways to develop have pluses and minuses. I wouldn't deny that, right? So what I want to say is obviously the deep thinking about a problem, to think upfront what all can happen in the end also leads to excellent products in their way. Yeah? But for me, sometimes it's also the merger of both ways to innovate that may really create a fantastic global success. So in that way, I see in India, and I always thought, wow, what is this? This will never finish, or this can never really work here. But I was always surprised that in the end, how we say in India, things fall into place. Yeah? And things get somehow into a resolution, and then the next step can also be done. So that's maybe the big difference in the innovation system. It's a lot really also people driven by ideas, by motivation, and by of course a very young workforce and very young population already that develops those ideas.
I think the last point is very important because India has this demographic dividend, as we put it. So it has the advantage of having like 500 million people below the age of 25. Imagine out of 1.3 or 1.4 billion people, about 500 million are below the age of 25. So this is really something India can work on. Whereas in China, we have the same problem as in Germany. We are getting too old. So China has to become rich before it gets old. And even now, China is losing like 2 million people per year in the workforce. From 2025 onwards, there will be like 8 million people per year less in the workforce. So this is a huge problem China has because of the one-child policy, which has been abolished. But still, most Chinese say we would like to have maximum one child, maybe two, but normally one, because one child I can send to, I don't know, to Harvard, and 2 or 3 have to stay in China. So I think India has a lot of advantages. But if we compare, and Clas, I mean, you have lived in China for many years and in India, and I have a bit of experience in both countries. But you're German, and I'm German. I'm living in Germany. So what is it about Europe, and what is left for Europe? China wants to be #1 in the world. India will be coming there. Maybe it takes 10, 20 years longer, but it will be a world power, definitely. In the US, with Mr. Trump behaving a bit erratic, to put it nicely, we don't know what it will happen, but couldn't this be a chance for Europe? I mean, why not? If we really were a European Union now, 27 states working together, we could cooperate, of course, with China and, of course, with India. Why not? We need China, definitely, after Corona, more than before, perhaps, because now we need all the masks and all this stuff. But I think China needs us also very much because all the growth we have in China would not be there without Europe. And India will be the next huge market. Now, already in my consultancy business, I see many German companies thinking about relocating to India because they, especially now in the crisis, they see how dependent they were on China, which is difficult to be too dependent on one country. So maybe relocation to India. So wouldn't this crisis and Mr. Trump be the huge chance for Europe if we are together to be strong again? And where would you see the main points? I mean, I think digitalization and artificial intelligence are 2 very important points for the future. Where's Europe? Where's Germany?
It's a very, very good question, Manuel. I believe, indeed, Europe has maybe its last chance now as a real united Europe to be an important player here. And I could certainly imagine a peaceful development of all those 3 big economies, India, China, and Europe, going forward, and basically complementing each other. I believe China definitely has a huge advantage today already in manufacturing, there's no doubt. And lots of this manufacturing, as far as I can observe, is, for example, here in the high-tech industry, wherever you want your mobile phone and stuff, you can't produce it anywhere else because the knowledge how to produce this to the today's price, at least in such a large scale, that knowledge is in China. Yeah. India, on the other hand side, has built this enormous software sector, right? This is the by far largest software nation in the world. And software in the end is also what drives many companies. I mean, even the board of Siemens recently proclaimed we are now a software company. So, and I believe very strongly that indeed the intelligence in the long run, you mentioned artificial intelligence, it sits in the software, right? And it sits in the algorithms. And there, of course, now India has a lot to offer to the rest of the world. And not only because it has smart people who even work maybe in India on a lower cost base than anywhere else in the world. It's also because the education system continuously also is focused on that sector and yeah, I would say multiplies the workforce in this respect very quickly. That is also, by the way, an advantage that the higher education system in India is nearly exclusively in English, which gives the workforce from India also a very big advantage in terms of globalization. Indian software engineers are really everywhere in the world. They also adjust very well in the world, maybe because of the Jugaad mindset, but also because of the language skills. This is a double advantage. Europe needs to get their act together. It's absolutely true. We need a harmonized way how to deal with certain issues. I mean, you mentioned the COVID-19 crisis. It's a perfect example how it should not work. Every country creating their own policies. We are blocking each other from moving from A to B. That's certainly not the ideal way. I mean, of course, health seems to be a national issue. I also just learned it during the crisis. I thought we have maybe also some common health policies when it comes to such a pandemic, but apparently not. But specifically on the digital side, we need to find answers also to the digital strategies of China in specific, but also to what happens in other parts of the world. And platform, huge software platforms are also cloud platforms in specific are dominated already by United States and China. It's high time for Europe to also develop alternatives.
Yeah, and then especially also for Germany, because I mean we are the middle of Europe. We are one of the richest countries, definitely in Europe. So it's on us. We have to concentrate, I think, on artificial intelligence, on digitalization, on all this what we are also doing and developing our youth. And then maybe as Europe, we do have a chance. And then we could work together. So I see Asia, I see India and China as a chance. I know that many Germans are more or less maybe even afraid of China, what is happening in yellow peril and all this nonsense. But we should know more about Asia, read, go there, travel there when it's allowed again, and do what both of us have been doing for the last 20, 30 years. I, of course, a bit longer than you. See with our own eyes and then judge and see it as a chance, all these people who are coming to us, and not as a threat. I think this would be a good basis for our future, only possibility of Germany and Europe surviving in this world, yes.
Yeah, it's true. To some extent, when I observe what right now happens in this COVID-19 crisis, that's actually my fear that we go a few steps backwards before we can move forward in this direction. Because you see, India is under a complete lockdown right now. Travel is forbidden within India. International travel has been completely stopped to and from India. This also imposes not only very difficult family situations for many families which are dispersed in different parts of the country or even internationally, but also stops, of course, many investments. It stops international student exchange and all of these programs, they come to a complete halt. And also China, where I live here right now, I could maybe still leave from China back to Germany, but then I cannot come back because also China has banned the entry for foreigners for a not known period. So all of these measures currently do not come to an end, but indeed, because you had mentioned it, if you see how China has dealt here with the situation, of course, there were clear measures and expectations. You mentioned also Confucianism. There's a high amount of discipline in the population and follow also orders coming from the government. And then we use here this app, because in Germany it's very much, this is the app here from China, and you can activate it through the Pay platform or through the WeChat platform. And that basically is your code. My code is green, which means I'm free to move within Shanghai, also meanwhile even beyond Shanghai. And this code, for example, colleagues have to show when they come into our company. You have to create it in that moment always, so people can see it's just fresh. If I have been in contact with a COVID-19 patient somewhere, or if I have come from a risk area, when I came, for example, from Germany 6-8 weeks ago, my code was yellow, right? And if you have yellow, you're supposed to stay at home and not roam around. And that's actually a public offense then if you roam around. And the police will make sure you stay at home. Okay. So these kind of apps, they have a very high adoption rate. It's also required. I would say COVID-19 finally made every Chinese having a smartphone. I mean, there were already 800 million, but I think now it's 1.3 billion. Everyone except people under 6 years probably now have a smartphone because it becomes your lifeline even to move. But it also shows that such technology can also help, and whether you like this now that you use such an app or not, I leave this to a personal judgment, but it definitely helps to cope with such situations in a very effective and digital way.
Yeah, but we Germans are afraid, that security is more important than everything else. So there's a huge discussion going on now in Germany about apps and what we should do and should not do. I
think we may have the vaccine before we have the app in Germany.
Yeah, we accept the vaccine definitely earlier than the app, sure. Matthias, I don't know, do we have any questions? Otherwise, Clas and we can go on for hours, but should we switch to the Q&A?
Sure. So thanks to the two of you for this very insightful conversation. Let's switch to the Q&A, but before, allow me a brief transition. So given our society's focus on fostering mutual understanding across cultures, let me ask both of you a rather personal question, and I would like to start with you, Manuel. So you said that you spent more than 40 years dealing with China and also teach Chinese language and other Chinese-related courses to your students. So I would be really keen to know what we can maybe learn from China, and also what you would recommend to maybe some of our younger participants who listen at the moment and who would like to dive deeper into China.
Difficult question to answer in a short sentence, but if you can read German, of course you have to read my books, because this is obviously a must. Crime novels and business. I wrote one book together with Clas on India, but another one on China. I think we can learn a lot from China. We can learn, for example, what we don't have at the moment in Europe, this kind of unity of standing together, of using the moment, making the best of it. A lot of learning is what students are doing. Maybe it's too much for some of us, but if I see how relaxed many people here are, even the young people, somehow I will find a job and I don't have to care about money, and somehow it will work out. This is not what the Chinese are doing. They are learning a lot. They say, I only have this one life and I have to use it. So as they say in Latin, carpe diem, do what you can do in a shortest possible time, learn a lot. And I think this is what we can learn from China. And if anybody who is listening now is interested in books or literature or anything, you can just write me in a mail or something, and I will send you some recommendations in English, of course.
Thanks, Manuel. Thanks for the great advice. Clas, a similar question to you with regard to India. Before you moved to Shanghai, you already mentioned it. You spent more than a decade in Bangalore. two of your children have been born there. I've seen on YouTube, and what I found particularly impressing, you established a children's home for less fortunate kids in Bangalore with some of your co-workers back then. So I would be happy to know if you could share maybe some of your key learnings. I mean, you mentioned some of it, but maybe for you personally, also as a leader at SAP, what you learned in India, and also maybe explain what the country, why is India so unique to you? Can you hear us, Clas?
Chinese have cut them off.
Yeah, the connection might be bad. Let's wait for a couple of seconds until he reconnects. Otherwise, I would hand over the question to you, Manuel. Maybe you can say a few words about it.
I think we can learn a lot of India, of course, definitely. What Clas mentioned a bit earlier was Jugaad. This is a very unique Indian way of approaching problems, of making the most of whatever you have, even if it's not a lot. He mentioned this example of the scanner. So this not giving up, I think Clas' example was very good. When he poses a problem in front of his software engineers, Germans always find an excuse why it can't be done, and Indians will find a way how it can be done. So this is a different mindset. Whatever problem there is, we will solve it, we can do it, and it's not just saying, they really will find a way. So often I think this is the future. Don't give up, just try it, do it hard, and you will succeed. And I think we can learn a lot. But I think Clas is back really now, so maybe
now I can see him twice on the phone and on the laptop. That's also fine.
Yeah, I have changed, but I hope you can hear me better now.
Yeah, we can hear you perfectly well. Have you heard the question, or should I briefly repeat it?
Yes, I heard the question, and I apologize for the technical glitch. But I heard also already Manuel answering in terms of the Jugaad and the innovation. And what I would like to add is just certainly the kind of positive outlook. My immediate learning in India was, I came from Germany. I had also this very critical mindset, and I would always see the glass being half empty. Yeah? And I learned immediately that the glass should be half full. And there's always something that will become better tomorrow. Yeah? And then also let a bit go from that. You have to plan every little detail of your life and of your what happens tomorrow, next week, where you travel in summer and so on. Till today, till I was in India, I have basically stopped making detailed travel preparations. We go with the family somewhere, we look around, we decide where we stay. And that's actually also another important value from India, which I learned, is certainly the value of your family. I think that's very, very unique. There's no other country when we do a family day at the company where we also invite the parents. Yeah, that's in Germany it would be really unheard of that you invite for an open day at your company your parents, but in India the parents just play this very important role, and I also try to emulate this in my own family life. So there are a number of these concepts, flexibility Manuel has mentioned, which also became part of my life through those more than 12 years in India.
And you can also use it in business, if I may add it. Because in China, we have this guanxi system, so relationship, whom do I know, who can help me somewhere? And in India, it's family, as Clas put it. So my mother is from Bombay, and she has, I don't know, 7 or 8 or 9 or whatever brothers and sisters she had. So we have a huge family, and somehow you're related to half of Bombay. So whenever I need something, I will give it to my family, and somebody pops up and says, yes, I know, I can help you, I know someone. So family in India maybe is comparable to guanxi in China. And so it's not like what is better, but it's completely different, and both are very useful.
Thanks a lot for your explanation. So we have a couple of participant questions. The first one would go to you, Manuel. The question from one of the participants is, who mainly drives innovation in China at the moment? Do you rather see whether it's the large companies like Tencent and Alibaba, or is it more the academia, or maybe even the SMEs? And what is the role of the central government in this context?
Well, it's all. I mean, of course, it's large companies like Huawei and Tencent and ZTE and so on, because they want to earn money. But all these huge companies, of course, are also driven by the central government. So often we have the question like Huawei, is it a private company? Is it a government-ruled company? Of course, it's a private company. And of course, there's nothing like a really private company in China, because always the government is somewhere behind it. And if you see the founder of Huawei, for example, Mr. Ren, he still is in the People's Liberation Army. He was an officer there, he still is. So of course, there are all these connections to the government. So innovation is driven by companies, yes, because they want to earn money. It's driven by the government because they want to be number one in the world. So all this mingles together. So the question is, if I may say so, I don't know who posted the question, is a bit German, because we like to discern between all these different parties. In China, you can't really do this, and all these people are working together in driving China to the number one in 2049.
Thanks, Manuel. We have another very practical question from Pavati Vasanta to you, Clas. Can you please share the name of the low-cost scanner? Because it sounds very familiar, since the Bertelsmann Foundation recently published a study on inclusive innovation in Asia. And one of the results of this study was indeed that India is among the most innovative consumers at the bottom of the pyramid. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the story is from General Electric, as I said, and the exact name now of that scanner, I can't recall, but there was, if I'm not mistaken, a Harvard Business Review case written about this, where also Jeff Immelt, back then the CEO of GE, was part of it. So if you look for that topic, reverse innovation, Jeff Immelt, you will definitely find exactly that paper which was written on that, and that would give you all the information, certainly also about the type of the scanner.
Perfect. Thanks, Clas. So we have also quite some questions on the topic of Corona. So maybe Manuel, you can answer for China a little bit, and Clas, you for India. So for instance, Stefan Geiger asks, to Manuel, do you think COVID-19 will change the world order concerning the superpowers China and the US? And Clas, you can think about maybe the next one. What problems might India face while coming out of the Corona crisis?
Mm-hmm. I don't think the Corona crisis or COVID-19 will change the world order, but I do think it will accelerate China's development and China's strive to be number one. Because what we see at the moment is China comes out first from all this trouble and tries to regain. The American GDP fell down by, I think, 4.8% in the first quarter. It was just released today, 4.8. So it's less than China, which had 6.8. But the worst is still to come in America. And China is already recovering. So I think, because Stefan asked, the world order is not going to change, but China will be even sooner number one than it would have been without Corona.
Thanks. Clas, you want to continue?
Yeah, first of all, I would in that point agree with Manuel. We already see this happening today. I mean, as you also know, China's GDP slumped by 6.8% in the first quarter. But we observe here a very clear pickup, right? The productivity is going up, all the companies are open. And so this really pushes on. In India, the situation, I think, is not yet decided. I would say the current lockdown, which is a complete lockdown, is till 3rd of May. The discussion is ongoing to extend it by another 2 weeks. Then the lockdown would be already significantly longer than in China. Nevertheless, India has on the ground, due to his huge unorganized sector and the million people who live very, very close to each other, a very unique situation, which is difficult in such a virus spread situation to resolve. So it's not 100% clear whether there are really good alternatives for the Modi government to curb with this. But I would say for India, the virus would create a similar problem than for most of the other countries, because it's more about flattening the curve and enabling a life with the virus, the same strategy we have, for example, in Germany, whereas in China, we have a clear strategy and it seems to be successful to enable a life after the virus. Yeah, so keep the virus just outside of the country. But I don't think that this strategy would probably work anywhere else.
Perfect, thanks, Clas. We have quite a few more questions. Maybe I give again one to you, Manuel, and one to Clas. So Manuel, one on the Belt and Road Initiative. So one of the participants is asking that both, or stating that both China and India are obviously heavily investing and are among the biggest trade partners in Africa and also increasingly in Latin America. So maybe you can say a few sentences about what are the main objectives of both countries there, and whether you see that the rivalry, so the competition between India and China, not only takes place in Asia itself, but also on other continents. And Clas, to you afterwards, maybe a question on India again. Seema wants to know what kind of industries from Germany will be looking forward to set up in India. What do you think was particularly interesting, and maybe connected to also whether India should increasingly focus on infrastructure investments from your perspective? Manuel, you want to start?
Yeah, for China, it's comparatively easy. I mean, Belt and Road, Idai Ilu, as it calls in Chinese, means we want to be number one in the world. We need the rest of the world to invest there because we need the resources. So of course, China will invest in Africa and South America, as I pointed out, Southeast Asia, because they need local resources. Might it be oil or gas or food, of course, and everything else. And of course, especially African countries, but even South American countries and other countries, they have this problem of a debt trap. So they will not be able to repay the loans, and China is gaining more and more influence. This is what China wants to do. They opened a military outpost in Djibouti, so right at the Horn of Africa, where strategically very, very intelligent and good place to be. And of course, European companies and governments, they criticize Djibouti. How can you let the Chinese in? And the Prime Minister of Djibouti said, yeah, what shall I do? Because Europeans, you don't come and invest in my country. The Chinese do come and invest. So of course, he's right. So what the Chinese do is they go there, they invest, they help the people. We don't. And then we criticize other people, which doesn't work. So many countries will have problems. The Chinese are also investing in Europe. I mean, they bought the port of Piraeus in Greece. They bought 10% of Rotterdam and 10% of London Heathrow. So they have many investments also in Europe, but we still have enough money. Other people don't. So the strategy of China is clear. What they want to do is it's kind of imperialism with money instead of weapons, which is intelligent and definitely good from their point of view.
Thanks. Clas, you want to?
Yeah, for the question on the industries, if we come from where are India's main challenges today, then it is indeed getting a world-class infrastructure really across the country, not only in pockets, and also to deal with the urbanization effects in terms of creating a sustainable living environment for its people. And I think cities like Bangalore that grow every year 10%, that's an enormous growth rate, which you also feel. I mean, some of our employees, they need meanwhile more than 2 hours to shuttle within the city to their workplace, and 2 hours and 2 hours back. That makes 4 hours loss of time in very unhealthy conditions. And or water is also an issue. I mean, a good portion of India still depends heavily on the monsoon, and God forgive that the monsoon would just not come for a year, right? Then there's no electricity, there's no fresh water anymore in many parts. So there are huge issues which India has to solve in this respect, and therefore industries that can help in terms of a more sustainable environment are not only welcome, they will also have very good business opportunities there, specifically with technology around it. That would be my quick answer to that.
Perfect. Thanks, Clas. We are slowly but steadily running out of time. So maybe one final question in Clas. I would give it to both of you because I think it's a very interesting question and a very nice question to wrap up. So it's about strategies Europe could pursue to adopt some certain positive attitudes. So both of you mentioned positive attitudes, what we can learn also from both China and India. However, two of our participants also state that obviously there's some kind of or at least a lack of knowledge and a lack of awareness concerning the rise of Asia. So it might be interesting. Maybe you have some nice ideas what you wish for also in the future when it comes to dialogue from a European and German perspective with regard to Asia. Yeah, Clas, feel free to begin.
Yeah, what we started when I lived in India and roundabout in the year 2000, 2001, the DAAD kind of restarted getting German students into India and vice versa. And you wouldn't believe that back then we had only about 600 Indian students in all of Germany. So that has definitely multiplied, but it can even grow. And also vice versa. I would really like to encourage German students to just go to India, enroll for one semester at the university, because this is the level where you really make friends and also really understand another culture much better. I mean, I've been as a student in China, and I would really not like to have missed that opportunity. That year I was privileged to spend there and really understand a bit of grassroots China. It helps me till today in my daily job and to do this job better. And I think the more exchange we get, the better it would be to learn from each other.
Perfect. Manuel, before you reply, just let me briefly jump in because Clas has to leave on point. So maybe, Manuel, we can talk for a couple of more minutes. Clas, thanks a lot. We really appreciate your time. Thanks for sharing your insights and experience. Yeah, take care of yourself. I hope the code on your phone stays green. And
it will stay green. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, perfect. So thanks again for your time, and we hope to welcome you in the future again.
Thank you, Matthias. Thank you also, Manuel, for the nice conversation. And I wish all the participants also a wonderful day. And thanks for listening to us. So goodbye, and maybe see you soon also face to face.
Yeah, thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Clas said. I mean, Clas was one of my first students. He learned Chinese at my university, and then I sent him to China. And you see what happened. He is now extremely successful in a huge company. So yes, of course, because you asked, we have to know more about these countries. And we means general public, but also our politicians. I'm giving a lot of keynote speeches and talks and everywhere and writing books and whatever, but many people still don't know a lot about China and or India. And basics, I'm not talking about detailed knowledge, I'm talking about geography and history and politics and economy and all this. So what our politicians also definitely need is more knowledge about Asia. And they should listen to people who know about Asia, because often politicians just don't listen because they think they already know it. So yes, as Clas said, students go to India, go to China, live there. It's fascinating, it's interesting, it's not easy. But I stayed there as a student 40 years ago, and there was no internet and nothing. So we couldn't even communicate with our family, and it was fantastic. It was interesting, and I think very helpful for the rest of my life. Go there. And everybody should know more about Asia, because this century definitely is the Asian century. Europe is gone, US is gone, it's Asia in this century. And I think this is what we should focus on, and this is the chance we do have in Europe, especially in Germany.
Thanks, Manuel. That's a very nice point to wrap up. Do you want to take one or two more questions? There are a couple of more questions also with regard to you. Yeah,
yes,
sure. Cool. Then we maybe just prolong for like 5 to 10 minutes. That all of your questions are answered. Maybe a question on FDI. One of our participants is talking about Chinese acquisitions in Europe. This was a big topic over the last couple of years. He's stating that there's also combined or along with Chinese investment, there's also a growing anti-Chinese sentiment. How would you, what's your view on this? How would you see that also from a German policymaker perspective?
Yeah, and there's always a bit of anti-China feelings in Europe because of cliches we have about China. 200 years ago, it was Napoleon, and then there were other politicians who talked negative about China, and now it's the virus situation. But the companies I'm consulting, they don't rely on these anti-China ideas normally, but they just look at the facts and figures. Where can I invest? Where can I put my money? Where do I get my employees if we're talking about going to China? And if we're talking about Chinese investment, foreign direct investment in Europe, if a small German company needs money, if it's risking of going broke, especially now with the virus situation, and the only investor is from China, then why not? They should be happy that there is an investor. And what we can see from the last 20 years, I think like 95% at least of all Chinese investments in Germany are doing fine. So the Chinese are not coming here to buy our companies, splitting them up, selling them again, like some hedge fund or whatever, but they are here to invest. They want to develop the market, develop the branch and the brand, of course. So yes, I'm in favor of Chinese investment here. Not that they will buy all our companies, but if we don't help these companies, I think many would be happy to have a Chinese investor, or of course an Indian investor. Why not from India? We have a lot of Indian business people with a lot of money. Welcome to invest in Germany. I think it's useful for both sides. Yeah.
You perfectly transfer to the next question unknowingly. Maybe we do it now. The last question. One of the participants want to know: would you say India can take up with China or even outpace China in the mid and long run? Like, given the obvious lag that China is still, India is still behind. Do you think this can change in the next decades to come?
I don't think India will outpace China in the next decade because it lacks a lot in terms of infrastructure, electricity, and even feeding its people. You know, this is the problem we have. In China, we have what we call a dictatorship, but they are feeding the people. And in India, we have democracy, but people are starving. So this definitely is a problem. It's not black and white. And so India will not outpace China in the next 10 years. But as we had pointed out, India has different advantages. For example, young population, democracy, English-speaking people, then this innovation from the grassroots, bottom of the pyramid. So India can do very well. And now, especially after the corona, I think some companies will think of relocating from China to other countries because they see that they were too dependent from China. So I think this is a chance if Modi grabs it, and if Modi already said it, even that Indian companies should look out for this, that many European companies might think of relocating to India instead of China. This is a big chance. And it's not about outpacing China. It's about India finding its own way in this world and using the chances it has. And I think India is doing quite good. And it's not the point, are we faster than China in 10 years or in 20 years or in 30 years? This is not really the issue.
I think this is a very positive and comprehensive note to end with. Yeah, we're coming to the end of this event. First and foremost, also a big thank you and Dankeschön to you, Manuel, for taking the time and being our guest today. I feel this was a very insightful conversation. And in case you want to learn more about Manuel's work and also the co-authored book with Clas, you find it online. I can also highly recommend Manuel's non-fiction books for a rainy day in quarantine. Sorry, fiction books, not non-fiction books like the crime novels. And yeah, you can find them on his website, vermeer-consult.com, or on Amazon, obviously. Also, big thanks to all the participants of today's event. Next week, there will be 2 more events with journalist and author Frank Vieren on China's future, and with Indian entrepreneur Dhanram on entrepreneurial challenges across cultures. You can find more information and also the registration link on our website. And many more online and physical events will follow over the next weeks and months. So stay tuned and maybe also subscribe to our newsletter. Again, Manuel, thanks for taking the time. I hope we can welcome you back soon as participant in our format. And lastly, a quick note: each of you participants will receive a feedback mail. So we would appreciate your suggestions, and if you take just 1 minute, so we can gradually improve our online webcast. And yeah, that being said, take care of yourself and your loved ones. We hope to welcome you soon again as participants in our AES speaker series. thanks a lot, and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.